Welcome to Guns, Guns, Gear, and Guns with Gary Gunderson. I am Gary Gunderson. The director of the Secret Service appeared in front of the House Oversight Committee due to recent notable events. And it did not go well for Director Cheatle.
I don't think you should resign. I think you should have been fired. Ma'am, you are a DEI horror story.
If Trump had been assassinated that day, if the gunman had succeeded, okay, would you have come and tendered your resignation?
I would still be sitting here because I would want to ensure the integrity of the investigation.
So you said, do you remember in an ABC interview you did that you didn't have people on the roof of the AGR building because you were worried about safety because of the slope?
I recall that statement.
Okay. Does the Secret Service have written policy you can share with us about slope roofs?
No.
You've mentioned specific increases in protection that you've provided for some of those individuals, correct?
Correct.
Based on what?
Well, some of it has been as a result of the tragic incident that occurred on the 13th.
So the Secret Service needed to learn that allowing a rooftop 150 yards away from a protectee, not putting that in a perimeter, not having someone guarding that roof, that information is new to you?
Was Mr. Crooks acting alone?
Again, I would have to refer you to the FBI's investigation.
Did he have a rangefinder? There were some reports that the individual had a rangefinder. That would certainly raise my suspicion. Did he have a rangefinder?
Yes, he did, but may I explain that at a number of our sites, especially when you're at outdoor venues, a rangefinder is not a prohibited item.
We almost lost a presidential candidate the other day.
When this guy took the shots, he climbed a ladder to get on the roof, correct?
I'm unable to answer details of exactly how the individual accessed the roof at this time.
The AR-15 styled rifle used in the shooting had a range of 400 to 600 yards, and therefore the AGR building was clearly within rifle range of the stage, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that this is the most serious security lapse since President Reagan was shot in 1981 of the Secret Service?
Yes, sir, I would.
And, do you know what Stuart Knight did when he was in charge at the time of the Secret Service? Do you know what he did afterwards?
He remained on duty.
He resigned.
Did you review the security plan for this event?
I personally do not review security plans for events that take place across the country.
Any of them? These multiple layers of accountability turn into layers of plausible deniability in agency after agency after agency. That's got to be fixed. Because
okay, well, I think it's fair to say the Overwatch failed because the shooter got up on the roof and stayed there for a while, and people had pointed him out. So do you think that your Overwatch was a failure in that case?
I think that we need to know the full details to understand how this occurred.
Director Cheatle, is there a standard perimeter that the Secret Service establishes around an event, or are those perimeters independently determined per event and scenario?
There is no standard. Every event and every venue is different and treated as such.
An AR-15 has a range of about 400 to 600 yards. My question is, why does the Secret Service perimeter, why is the Secret Service protective perimeter shorter than one of the most popular semi-automatic weapons in the United States?
You answered more questions with an ABC reporter than you have with members of Congress.
So what you're saying now is that the Secret Service did not see the shooter on the roof until after the shooter took a shot?
I do not have all of those details at this time.
Have you visited the site?
No, I have not.
9 days and you have not visited the site. The shooter has visited the site 2 more times than you have, and he had a drone, and he picked the AGR building.
I would be remiss if I did not also extend my condolences on the passing of your colleague, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee was always engaged in the oversight of the Secret Service, and her passing is a great loss to this body.
Would it be okay to say she lied to Congress with that statement? But it wasn't all fun and games, as you can't let a good tragedy go to waste, and some members of the committee could not help but attack the Second Amendment.
Some are calling it a miracle that former President Trump escaped this AR-15 attack, unlike so many thousands of our fellow citizens who have been killed or seriously wounded in other AR-15 shootings. We must therefore also ask hard questions about whether our laws are making it too easy for potential assassins to obtain firearms generally and the AR-15 specifically. It's time to pass universal background checks and build on this administration's work to ensure that we permanently close the loopholes in the Brady law for gun show purchases, online purchases. We have to find the courage and resolve to pass a ban on the AR-15 and other assault weapons.
Bizarrely, several representatives also tried to get the director to state that the proliferation of firearms makes her job harder. While they are grilling her for the colossal failure she oversaw, they were just after that soundbite.
Director Cheatle, would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people who have exhibited a propensity for violence or instability could carry a concealed handguns in D.C.?
I think being a Secret Service agent and an officer or a law enforcement officer in any state is difficult.
Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people in D.C. could carry concealed handguns with large capacity magazines? Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if more people could carry handguns in D.C.?
On one particular side of the aisle don't really want to talk about, like AR-15s and access to them by a 20-year-old, or anybody for that matter. Presumably, Director Cheatle, the ubiquity of weapons, guns in America, especially assault weapons or semi-automatic weapons, that's helped your job and the mission of your agencies. Right? It's made it less complicated. Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
Real simple. More guns, especially dangerous ones, have made your job protecting people easier. Is that not right?
I think from every
Director Cheatle, this is simple English. More guns, do they make your job more complicated or less complicated?
I think the Secret Service needs to take into account.
I didn't ask that.
They're in.
I'm sorry. I asked a simple question, which deserves a simple answer. The ubiquity of guns, dangerous weapons in America, like AR-15s, has that made your job, that is to say the mission of the Secret Service, easier or more difficult? Does the ubiquity of guns make your job easier or more difficult today?
I understand the Second Amendment rights of individuals.
I didn't ask that question. I'm not questioning the Second Amendment. I'm asking a simple analysis, Director Cheatle. Do guns make your job easier or harder?
And we need to make sure that we are mitigating all threats, whether that be
That
weapons,
isn't my question.
personnel.
That is not my question. And now I think you're evading the answer, which is not a hard one.
I am sorry that you feel that way, sir.
Let me ask I want to follow up on Representative Connolly's question, in which he asked about guns, and you were not willing to commit that makes your job harder. This is not about the Second Amendment. If there were over 400 million guns on the streets, if all of those guns were machine guns, would that make your job harder to protect people?
Again, I think weapons that are out there.
If all of those
job
guns were rocket-propelled grenades, would that make your job harder?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Perfect. This is not a trick question.
So that's a win? And I joked about her lying to Congress, but she legit lied to Congress.
One of your goals in the strategic plan is to champion diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. You've accomplished the accessibility part. What standards, do you keep the same standards for all applicants and all, or does every Secret Service agent meet the same qualifications, or do you have different standards for different people?
Yes, sir. Everyone who moves through the application process has to meet the same standards to become a special agent.
Their own website has different standards for men and women, like different standards.
Acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service.
Republicans have wrongfully and shamefully stated that hiring women and people of color hindered the response to the shooting.
One of my questions has to do with if you have any bias training. So many times in having to deal with law enforcement that there usually is not a perception of a threat when it is a young white male, even if they are carrying a long gun.
I'm fairly certain everyone thinks bringing a rifle to a campaign speech and setting up on a rooftop would constitute a threat regardless of race or gender.
The former president gets a hearing in his attempt to assassinate, but our residents don't get a hearing about mass shootings, about gun violence.
Ma'am, this is the House Oversight Committee meeting about the oversight of the Secret Service. What agency are you overseeing for generic committee hearings on mass shootings? And of course, there was a lot more gun control calls and calls for banning AR-15s and generally calls to infringe on the Second Amendment.
Use the mass shooter's gun of choice, an assault weapon, specifically an AR-15 style rifle, and presumably a large capacity magazine, which is defined in D.C. as a magazine that can hold more than 10 bullets.
To be fair, he only got off 8 rounds before being domed, so his magazine capacity was irrelevant.
Interestingly enough, I was serving in the State House right after there was a mass shooting in El Paso. We had an opportunity to do right by our citizens in Texas, but we did not. Instead, they passed permitless carry. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the state of Texas decided that they would ignore those warnings, and they passed the law instead. And right after they passed that law, we ended up with Uvalde.
Uvalde clearly had nothing to do with permitless carry, nor the fact that officers were afraid to enter the classroom. This is a complete misdirect.
But I can't believe we're just going to focus on that and not the fact that we're hearing yet again in the headlines a 20-year-old young man having access to an assault weapon, a weapon of war many of my veterans say they have to be trained to use.
Your rights are not rights if they are dependent on outside certification. And they just went on like this.
Millions and millions of Americans don't feel safe with all the AR-15s out there. We thought it...
To weapons of war.
When he said he recreated the shooting twice with an AR-15, and he had a 94% success rate, 15 out of 16 shots. I don't know why that doesn't convince him that we should get rid of AR-15s, but clearly we need to do something about the prevalence of AR-15s and weapons of war on our streets.
Republicans are ignoring solutions like gun safety reform and instead...
That the whole country is living like this in fear and in terror of assault weapon attacks against an AR-15 attack, could get together on the question of public security against an AR-15 attack, because all of us are vulnerable. How uniquely strange it is that we allow 20-year-olds to access AR-15s, weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction.
We allow AR-15s to be purchased with abandon, promiscuously, all over the country. And I think it is because of an honest disagreement we have about the Second Amendment. There are some people who think the Second Amendment means you've got the right to arm yourself with whatever weaponry you need to overthrow the government of the United States, and we reject that as a false interpretation of the Second Amendment.
Well, I reject your rejection, so there, you're an idiot. Anyways, that's all for today. I have a whole playlist of similar videos where I go through various congressional hearings that are usually full of idiocy, so check that out if you are new. Also, please consider subscribing to the channel, sharing it, and liking the video to help the channel grow. You can also support me further on Patreon or join our free Discord server linked in the description. Thanks for watching.